A blow to the UN's efforts for peace and culture. The US and Israel are quitting UNESCO. Are they sending a message or abandoning global responsibilities? I'm Imran Garda, and today's Newsmaker is a shrinking UNESCO. The Taj Mahal, Stonehenge, Angkor Wat and Machu Picchu, all considered to be of outstanding universal value. They're just a few of the more than 1,000 places UNESCO protects, and the US will soon have nothing to do with it. They've announced they'll be leaving the UN's educational, scientific and cultural organization at the end of the year, along with Israel. Washington says it's costing them too much money and it no longer wants to support a group that has what it calls an anti-Israel bias. Earlier this year, UNESCO labeled Israel an occupying power in Jerusalem. What impact is the US's withdrawal likely to have? Here's Yvette McCullough.
It's an international body trying to build peace through education and the preservation of culture. But the US says UNESCO is failing, and it's now walking away from the organisation.
Fortunately, this venue has become politicized, undermining the work of UNESCO across its mandate. It's become a venue for anti-Israel bias, and unfortunately we are taking the decision to withdraw from UNESCO at this time.
This isn't the first time the Americans have withdrawn. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan pulled the US out, accusing the UN body of being corrupt and having an ideological tilt towards what was the Soviet Union. It didn't join again until 2002, under President George W. Bush. Then in 2011, the US cut more than $80 million a year in funding to UNESCO after it granted Palestine full membership. The US now owes UNESCO more than $500 million.
That amount in arrears is essentially unsustainable.
While the US will be out of UNESCO by the end of the year, it says it will remain what's called a permanent non-member observer state.
Well, I express my deep regret. I think we need everybody on board, and particularly, of course, the United States, who are our founding member and one of our most important supporters in all of this.
The US isn't the only member UNESCO lost last week. Israel also announced its withdrawal, and the timing was apparently coincidental. Israel has been increasingly scathing of what it sees as UNESCO's support for Palestine. Last month, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told the UN General Assembly the body was promoting fake history. Last year, Israel recalled its ambassador to UNESCO. It was upset by Arab governments securing support for a resolution that denounced Israel's policies around religious sites in occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And in July, UNESCO declared the Old City in Hebron, in the occupied West Bank, a Palestinian World Heritage Site, further angering Israel and its American ally.
אונסקו הפך לבמה להחלטות הזויות, אנטי-ישראליות, אנטישמיות למעשה. אנחנו מקווים שהארגון ישנה את דרכו, אבל איננו תולים תקוות בכך.
Is the criticism being thrown at UNESCO fair, or is it doing exactly what it was created to do? And now that it's without the support of its most powerful member, how much peace will it be able to promote? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
I asked UNESCO's Director of Communications, Vincent Deforny, to respond to criticism of the organization.
We received last week on Thursday, we received a notification that the US would withdraw from the UNESCO at the end of 2018. And of course, this is a very disappointing, let's say, situation. We regret, as an international organization where we have 195 member states, we regret that one of the founding members is leaving the organization. It's really a pity for multilateralism. It's a pity also for the universality of this organization, which has now been working for more than 70 years, trying to address very complex and worldwide issues in the field of education, science, culture, and freedom of expression. This is something which has already occurred. Very unfortunately, the US already withdrew in 1984. They came back in 2002. Some other member states also left. For example, South Africa, in the time of apartheid, they left UNESCO when there were some criticisms against the attitude of UNESCO towards the apartheid. And then, of course, they came back when the time was much better and when the South African government was much more inclined to work with UNESCO on these issues. So we really regret the decision of the State Department of the United States. We welcome all the other member states also to continue and strengthen the work of UNESCO. This is what it is important, and we believe that it is extremely important to maintain a strong international organization working for international cooperation in these areas for building peace in the minds of men and women.
Well, joining me now is UNESCO critic Jason Epstein. He's the president of public policy consulting firm South 5 Strategies in Washington, D.C. Jason, good to have you on the program. So UNESCO says they don't have an anti-Israel bias. Tell me, what's your problem with them?
That's flat out incorrect. Thank you for having me, by the way. UNESCO has a rich history of anti-Israel bias. Just between 2009 and 2014, there were 46 resolutions targeting Israel, 46 measures, 1 on Syria, 0 for the regime in Tehran, 0 for the regime in Pyongyang, 0 for anyone else for that matter. I think the record speaks for itself, and it's very unfortunate because UNESCO does do some very good work around the globe.
Yeah, so when we look at that very good work, brands and protects the world's most precious places, teaches poor kids to read, gives water access to the downtrodden, and all of that. Well, with all of that in mind, wasn't it maybe a better idea for the United States and Israel to work with UNESCO to criticize them within the system rather than to pull out?
Well, you bring up a very good point, Imran. Thank you. It's important to note that there is no doubt in the United States, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a left-winger, a centrist, or a right-winger, that UNESCO has failed on the issue of combating hate vis-a-vis a single member state named Israel. The question that we're having today is, what is the best way to try to effectuate change? And based on your initial question, if there is this denial going on that there is a bias, we've got a problem. And I think the Trump administration, in doing what the Reagan administration announced in 1983, announcing an intention to withdraw from the organization, but to maintain observer status, demonstrates that the United States will look elsewhere to promote its values, its important values overseas.
Do you feel as if it's the right price to pay for all those good projects around the world losing funding when it comes to the US leaving?
Well, as you know, the US suspended funding in 2011. And that was under the Obama administration. I know that there is a tendency to put this on the Trump White House, and it is important to note that the concern was raised has been raised in a bipartisan manner in 2011, and that President Obama's permanent representative to UNESCO in Geneva was very critical,
Certainly.
for example, of the decision to honor Che Guevara, and also the numerous anti-Israel resolutions. So again, I think it's
Totally.
important. It's important to point that out.
Yeah. And Obama did this. He cut funding in 2011 because of the PA getting full membership, right? But there was always this hope that the
Correct.
money would come back and that relations with the United States would get better. By pulling out, let me rephrase, there's a cementing of the fact that US money, which is deemed crucial by UNESCO, is not going to come. And if it's not coming back, it means all those nice projects, which you admitted to a couple minutes ago, are not going to get the funding that they possibly deserve. Is that the right price to pay for what you call an anti-Israel bias?
Well, I think this is about negotiation, and if the new Director General, Madame Azoulay, is able to take control, is able to exercise effective control over her governing board, no small task, I admit, then I think that that we may see a different course charted.
Yep.
In the meantime, the United States will continue to fund efforts. As you know, America is a generous country, and Americans are perhaps the most generous people on earth, and they will continue to fund important initiatives around the globe that promote the similar efforts to what UNESCO undertakes.
Yeah, let's have a little listen to what the new Director General, Audrey Azoulay, had to say very recently.
The first thing I will do is work to restore its credibility, restore the faith of its members and its efficiency, so it can act on the challenges facing our world, because it is the only organization that can.
So in a way, I mean, by her saying, I want to restore credibility, restore the faith of its members, and so on, maybe there's an admission of some guilt, or that they might not have done things perfectly right along the way. Let me ask you then, Jason, what can she do in the short term that would convince someone like you that the US and Israel should rejoin the organization?
Well, I think we can hope that there will be a termination of the flood of anti-Israel resolutions. Just one this spring, which had to do with pretty much effectively denying the Jewish connection to Jerusalem, also the Christian connection to Jerusalem. So I think the first thing that she should do is to ensure that there is a new sheriff in town and that the business of UNESCO is promoting collaboration, not hate, not division, not conflict. And if she charts that path, then I think over the next 18 months, you know, the decision to withdraw becomes effective at the end of next year. I think that that the White House, the administration, will look at this very closely, and obviously will want to work with a director who has that power.
What if I told you
determination.
Certainly, what if I told you that maybe this has less to do with UNESCO and an anti-Israel bias, or even anti-Semitism, if some have called it, and more to do maybe with Donald Trump just wanting to exit as many international organizations as possible because he doesn't want to get involved?
Well, President, obviously there's concern that's being expressed from all quarters about what are the intentions of this administration. But I can assure you that had Marco Rubio been elected president, had Ted Cruz been elected president, had I will even go so far as to say Jeb Bush been elected president of the United States, this decision would have still taken place. This is not about Donald Trump. The negotiating tactics may be very different. He's certainly a disruptor in that regard. The rhetoric may have been very different. But I assure you that had another Republican been elected president, this decision ultimately would have been the same.
I wonder what you think about what the scientists have said. They try not to have a dog in the political fight, particularly when it comes to Israel and the Palestinian territories, whether it's an occupation or not, and so on. There are those who wade into it. These scientists have not and do not. But Marie-Cécile Naves saying, by leaving UNESCO, Trump confirms his contempt for science and the world. This is a French scientist. We have Rush Holt, the CEO of AAAS, which publishes Science Insider, saying the continued retrenchment of the US administration from active participation in international diplomacy efforts and dialogue is deeply concerning to the scientific community. When you hear that, do they have a case at all?
I think time will tell, and I think that that scientists are most effective when they stick to their profession and the work that they do. I understand that that the funding is important, But like I mentioned before, there are plenty of other charitable organizations. There are many other agencies that are conducting this very important work. Look, there are people who have done some great work in many different fields. But if there is a scandal, we don't sweep it under the rug just because of that great work. These scandals and these problems need to be confronted. And anti-Semitism and obsession with a single member state, a democracy where whether people are Jewish or they are Christian or Muslim, they have equal rights as Israeli citizens, that needs to be confronted, not swept aside saying, well, you know, we do some very good work in other areas.
You said anti-Semitism, and you know, this is interesting to me because I guess I'm asking you if an anti-Israel bias necessarily means anti-Semitism as well, because there are those who called the UNESCO designation of the old city of Hebron in the West Bank, which is disputed, Hebron in the West Bank is occupied under international law. It's disputed, including its Tomb of the Patriarchs, as a Palestinian World Heritage Site. So there can be an argument to be made that UNESCO took the side of the Palestinians. But why would you say it's anti-Semitic as well? Tell me why.
Well, look, criticism of Israel is not in and of itself anti-Semitic. Criticism of the idea that Israel has sovereignty over Eastern Jerusalem is not anti-Semitic. Denying or effectively denying a Jewish presence in Jerusalem that goes back 3,000 years is, I don't know what else to call it. It is either willful ignorance, but I would prefer saying that it is an anti-Semitic thought, yes.
Okay. Jason Epstein, good to talk to you on the Newsmakers. Thanks so much for joining us. Still ahead, has the US lifted sanctions on a war criminal? We ask if Sudan's reforms are enough to welcome it back into the international community. And are the Igbo people any closer to independence? We speak to one of the Biafran movement's leaders about their struggle to split from Nigeria. Welcome back. A 20-year embargo no more. After 2 decades, the United States has removed sanctions against Sudan. Washington says the nation has taken steps towards addressing terrorism and human rights abuses. But critics say the Trump administration has made the wrong call. Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir is still wanted by the International Criminal Court for genocide. And rights groups say Sudan is still plagued by violations against civilians. So, how much progress has the government actually made? And could there be other reasons for Washington's kindness? Vanessa Keneally has more.
After 2 decades of being frozen out economically, the thaw has begun.
I believe that lifting of U.S. sanctions will encourage people to use legal channels to exchange money, even within the banking system, so people will not go to the black market.
Washington says it's confident that Sudan has done enough to have the trade embargo lifted, but it will still be considered a country that supports terrorism alongside Syria and Iran. The US also says President Omar al-Bashir, who once played host to Osama bin Laden, still faces charges of genocide at the International Criminal Court. So why have sanctions been lifted? Well, Washington says the government in Khartoum is making gains. Relations with its neighbours, including South Sudan, are better, and aid organisations are allowed in to help those wounded in conflict zones. But is it really any better for the average Sudanese family?
I take 2 spoons of milk and give my kids 3 spoons, or 1 spoon for my husband and I, in order to give the kids 2 spoons for their nutritional needs.
Sudan has already been getting help from abroad for years. China controls around 75% of the oil sector, and Malaysia and India are looking to grow their investments there. Saudi Arabia and its neighbours also heavily depend on Sudan for their wheat, since the nation is the breadbasket of Africa. But are the biggest superpowers ignoring what's really happening for their own gain? Human Rights Watch said in Darfur, southern Kordofan and Blue Nile, government forces attack civilians, forcing tens of thousands of people to flee. And protests have also been quashed across the country, including at several university campuses. So will opening Sudan up economically actually lead to social change, or will it be business as usual for the country's government? Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by Zach Verton. He was a U.S. State Department official under President Barack Obama and is now a visiting lecturer of international affairs at Princeton University. And in London, we have Jonathan Offel-Ansah. He's the founder and publisher of Africa Briefing. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Zach, if I can begin with you, is the lifting of those sanctions on Sudan a good thing?
I think so, Imran. Anyone that looks at Sudan and its government's long history of violent rule will agree that change is necessary. The question is how. And I think for too long, Washington pursued a policy of punishment only. And I think this lifting of sanctions is an attempt to continue a policy that began under Barack Obama to chart a more nuanced, smarter policy that couples both engagement and pressure.
Yeah, interestingly, one of the few times Donald Trump seems to be following through on something that Barack Obama has started. Jonathan Offel-Ansah, more carrot than stick, is that the way to go with Sudan?
Yes, and I also actually agree with the other gentleman that I'm surprised, the Trump administration has decided to lift the sanctions, and pleasantly so, I must say, because the sanctions, were crippling the Sudanese economy, for no justifiable reason at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's try and sort of step back for a second and go, maybe the sanctions were bad, right? The sanctions could have been absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I remember being there in 2008, I think, when the national airliner went down and crash landed in Khartoum, and more than 30 people died. Many people blamed the sanctions and the fact that the airline didn't have good parts. So whether the sanctions were good or bad, let's make that immaterial for the moment, Zach. And let me ask you, has Sudan done enough to deserve better treatment?
I think they've done enough to start a new round of engagement, and that's what this is about. And I'd remind viewers that this was never meant to be a once-off. I think we should view the announcement from the Trump administration as the beginning of a new round of engagement, not as the finish line. Look, Khartoum still wants plenty of things from Washington and the rest of the Western world. They want the state sponsor of terrorism designation lifted. They want normalization of diplomatic relations, and they want to get out from a crushing amount of debt, something on the order of $50 billion. So now Washington is in position to use this new round of engagement, and they should immediately take forward a kind of phase two and make bigger asks for what they'd like to see in terms of continuing change in Sudan, both continuation of what's happened so far, as well as greater gains in terms of a long-term political process.
Yeah, there seems to be a contradiction at play here, because we're hearing that one of the reasons for the delisting was that Sudan is cooperating when it comes to the fight against terror, but Sudan is still listed as a state sponsor of terror. Let's have a little listen to Sudan's Foreign Minister, Ibrahim Ahmed Ghandour. He had something to say about this.
It is ironic that we are among the best countries in combating terrorism, while still included on the list of countries harboring terrorism. I have been saying repeatedly, this is a paradox. We are still included on the list while we are the best in combating terrorism. However, it is politics. It's not about humiliation, but rather about politics. Many times, you should cope with the detriments and deal with the reality accordingly. There is no need to be overly brave. It's not useful. Being pragmatic will help us more.
So, Jonathan, tell me about that contradiction and where you stand on this paradox.
Yes, it's a contradiction. I mean, if Sudan, well, to use a euphemism, has come out from the cold, out enough for the U.S. to lift sanctions? Why are they still on the lists, of terrorist sponsoring countries? So it's it's a contradiction in terms, if I can say that. Okay, so I believe, but I think that this is the first step, in normalizing, or reestablishing full relations, economic, political relations with Sudan. I believe it's a first step. So we have to see what next step the Trump administration will take.
Jonathan, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what Alan Ngari, a senior researcher at ISS, the Institute for Security Studies, had to say, writing in, or quoted in Daily Maverick, saying this was a measure of duplicity, that the humanitarian condition continues to deteriorate with little or no access by humanitarian organizations and CSOs into areas such as Darfur. There's documentation of ongoing violations of human rights and serious crimes taking place there. And he goes on to cite Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and others, talking about the fact that there's still some very bad things happening at the hands of the Sudanese army under the control of Omar al-Bashir in places like Darfur, which the world seems to have forgotten about, yet Sudan is coming in from the cold. What's going on there, Jonathan?
Bad things happen everywhere, okay? We know how many blacks have been killed by the police, right? And the police gone scot-free in the U.S., okay? No country is 100%, can I say?
But come on, Jonathan, that's a really, I mean, that analogy is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, police killings in the U.S. versus a situation like Darfur. Are you seriously comparing the two?
Yes, I'm comparing the two because if you say, I mean, some places are inaccessible, there are human rights being trampled upon, and so on and so forth. What about what is happening in your own backyard?
Yeah, certainly. But,
okay.
But we're talking about, 250,000 people killed versus police engagement with some, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I mean, okay, you've made the analogy. I don't think it's one that fits, but let me then just focus away from the analogy and focus on the fact that Darfur hasn't been solved. So what are we going to do? Just throw those people under the bus in Darfur and say, well, Sudan's coming from the cold. It's a U.S. ally now. Bad things happen everywhere.
No, Darfur, I believe, will be solved, but it's not a problem that could be solved overnight. Okay, like I said earlier on, lifting of the economic sanctions is the first step, right, in the positive engagement between the U.S. and Sudan. So I believe, I'm hopeful that with this lifting of the sanctions, further engagement will take place, right, and solutions found for the Darfur situation.
Zach Vertin, the fact that a way to look at this is not so much that the U.S. removes sanctions on Sudan, but it can be extended to the U.S. removes sanctions against the regime of Omar al-Bashir, wanted by the International Criminal Court, suspected on 5 counts of crimes against humanity, 2 counts of war, 3 counts of genocide. It doesn't look very good, does it?
I wouldn't say. I'd say it's a far cry to say that this measure means that the U.S. and Sudan are allies. Again, there's a long way to go in Sudan, both in terms of its domestic conflicts and in terms of long-term political transformation. And I can tell you, those were the things. Those 2 objectives were what ignited this policy shift under Barack Obama and has continued here. So again, I don't think we should view this as a finish line. This does not mean everything is hunky-dory in Sudan. There's a long way to go. And I think the Trump administration should build on these recent gains, build on this opportunity, build on the leverage it now has to extract further gains. Again, I mentioned the things that are outlined and that Sudan wants, and President Trump should make clear that the path to normalization will, again, need to see substantial increasing changes.
Okay, so Zach, help me understand. What has Sudan done? Can you give me an example of something that they've done that has pleased the Americans?
Sure, and I don't think this should be unduly focused on counterterrorism operations. As I mentioned, an end to the domestic wars and internal domestic change is what started this policy. There were 5 tracks, which include an end to military offensives in the identified areas, increase of humanitarian access, as well as cooperation on regional issues and counterterrorism fronts. There's been progress, as documented in the State Department report, in all of those areas. That said, there's a long way to go. Again, this is about digging out of a hole of mutual mistrust and getting to a place where both sides that they can show that they can deliver. We've done that. We've done that now. The task is where to go from here.
Zach, has Sudan agreed to distance itself from Iran?
Say that again?
Has Sudan agreed to distance itself from Iran as part of this shift in relations?
That was not explicitly part of the package. Okay. Certainly the Sudanese had, in the previous year and a half, taken it upon themselves to distance from Iran. Certainly there were concerns inside the administration also about distancing from North Korea. Those were not explicitly part of this package, but I know that they're pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, I'm glad that...
and so I think the trick...
Go ahead.
No, the trick is now that the Sudanese, as I mentioned, there are things that they continue to want from Washington. That puts the United States in a position of leverage, which it did not achieve through a policy of punishment.
Right.
The pressure alone did not force changes in Khartoum, and in time it placed undue strain on ordinary civilians. Again, we all agree that drastic change is necessary in Sudan. The question is how to go about it and what kind of time frame we should be thinking about in terms of achieving that change.
Certainly, and I'm glad Zach mentioned North Korea as a possible piece of the puzzle, because multiple reports coming out saying that, Jonathan, that Sudan had agreed to stop buying weapons from North Korea because it did in 2013. That was well documented. And I read that and I think, Jonathan, come on, how low is the bar here? Stop buying weapons from North Korea for the sanctions to be lifted. Is that how low the bar is, Jonathan?
Well, I think so, yes, because in life, generally, you do not get something for nothing, right? You give something and you get something back. So maybe that was part of the bargaining chip that the Trump administration had to use. And like I said, Sudan has been reeling for the economic sanctions. So something had to give. So they had to give something in order to receive something.
Right. And Jonathan, Sudan seemed to have caused some trouble for South Sudan during the time that it had broken away after it had its independence referendum with Abyei and so on. Has there been enough evidence that Khartoum has backed off enough? I mean, South Sudan itself is a complete mess at the moment and worth addressing for the entire international community. But has there been enough evidence, Jonathan, that Khartoum has backed off and isn't meddling in the business of South Sudan?
I don't know, how much meddling Khartoum, is doing in South Sudan, but I believe that no matter what, if there's any meddling at all, I believe it's subsided.
Zach, does Sudan still deserve to be on the list of state sponsors of terror?
I understand that's a review that's ongoing. I can't speak to that. It's a designation made by the intelligence community. I do believe that's ongoing, but I can't speak to that. It's long been a political football. The law itself says that they must bar any kind of cooperation with any designated organizations for a period of at least 6 months. I imagine that will be part of the review going forward. And again, should be part of a larger package of items and a larger package of asks that the Trump administration now takes.
Do you feel that they've...
That this not end here?
Certainly. Do you feel they've improved on human rights?
I think there's a long way to go. I think there's a long way to go. I think the measurable change in the areas identified was enough to get both the Obama administration and the Trump administration to take this first step, but certainly human rights should be part of the package long term. But again, the best way to answer an end to conflicts domestically, the best way to address concerns about religious freedom and human rights is a political transformation. And this policy is in part attempted to help set that or to assist the Sudanese people in taking that forward. But again, this is going to be a long-term prospect.
Jonathan, are we going to be seeing a political transformation unfold now?
Well, yes. I mean, a journey of 1,000 steps, miles begin with one step. So this, I believe, is the first step in seeing, some sort of transformation in the long term, in the long run.
Okay. Zach Vertin and Jonathan Offel answer. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
Shadowy Russian agencies spreading false information to manipulate public opinion before an election.
Drain the swamp!
You might think it's a plot from a Cold War spy novel, but according to some of the world's biggest tech companies, it's more the reality on social media. Facebook, Google, and Twitter are investigating thousands of dollars worth of advertising purchases on their platforms. The companies believe the transactions may be part of what could have been a Russian campaign to influence voters in last year's US presidential election. The findings from all three companies are adding fuel to accusations Russia interfered in the election process.
You have the Russians attacking the foundations of American democracy.
The three say advertising ranged from divisive social and political messages on Facebook to political content on YouTube. Some of the most significant material existed on Facebook for 2 years, most of it in the period leading up to the election. The ads promoted fake Facebook pages on issues linked to immigration, race, and gender. Like Google and Twitter, Facebook says the ad purchases were likely made from Russia, but the investigation is ongoing.
IPOV has rightfully been declared a terrorist organization by the Nigerian government. It is engaged in terror activities, illegal taxation, use of weapons against the armed forces and the police, and attack on the national institutions.
Calls for independence seem to be sweeping the globe, from northern Iraq to northern Spain. But one area that receives less attention is where the Igbo people in southern Nigeria live. They're a distinct linguistic and ethnic group among many in Nigeria. They're pushing to break away from Abuja and form a separate state called Biafra. But the government has labeled the group a terrorist organization. The movement's leader is on trial for treason, but on Tuesday's hearing, he failed to show at court. In fact, he's been missing for weeks, and his lawyer says the government took him following a military operation in his home city. Well, I'm joined now from London by the deputy leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Uche Mifo. He's also the second in command of what's called the Great Army of Biafra. Thanks for joining us, Uche Mifo. Good to have you on the Newsmakers. So your leader, Nnamdi Kanu, didn't show up in court.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any idea where he is?
No, I don't. I don't have an idea. The Nigerian military should be able to provide an answer to that. And so every inquiry regarding the supreme leader of indigenous people of Biafra, who is also my leader, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, should be directed to the Nigerian military. They were the people who unleashed terror and mayhem on his residence, in the process killing and spilling the blood of a cross-section of Biafran youths. A number of them were taken away, sizable number were mowed down. It was at this particular point in time that we lost contact with our leader. And so it is only very fair to direct that question to the Nigerian military, to Muhammad Buhari, the arch-genocidist, the terrorist, who is actually diverting state resources to unleashing terror on innocent indigenous civilian population.
Okay, but you heard Garbashehu, Buhari's spokesman, in the build-up to us talking, where he says it's clear they consider you terrorists. And this is along with governors of 5 other states in the region, because they say the group uses weapons against the state, there's illegal taxation, and the attacking of national institutions. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, terrorists behave in a systematic pattern. If we are terrorists, maybe, of course, I should be a terrorist. You are talking to me now, you know my address, you know where I'm coming from, and the indigenous people of Biafra, for avoidance of doubt, are indigenous to the land of Biafra. They are the original owners of land of Biafra. They are everywhere. They are legitimate in every country where they are. They go about their normal duties. They engage meaningfully in the lives of communities where they are. They have friends, they have relatives, they have families, they go to work, they come back, they are professionals in their fields. You have lawyers, you have doctors, you have captains of industries, and of course you have religious leaders. You have ordinary people, men, women, and children. They are everywhere, and we are not hidden. If we are terrorists, we shouldn't be coming out in the public and mingling with ordinary people. And as a matter of fact, Garbashehu is a product of the symptomatic institutional decay that Nigeria has become, has indeed dished out in recent times. It is about official deception in highest quarters. The Nigerian government officials do not actually know what they have come to do. All they know is about what they can gain from whatever they are doing. They don't put the interests of the people at heart. They are opportunists. And as you can see, Garbashehu said all that he has said. From your own vintage position, you can see that IPOB are very civil, they are innocent, they are unarmed, they are non-violent. All we want is referendum. All we want is a democratic process of referendum to ascertain where the people of Biafra want to be, whether they want to be in Nigeria or in Biafra.
So, Uche, there are Nigerians who don't agree with you. They say we are a multi-ethnic state. Part of our social contract, politically and socially, is that we have different languages, we have different ethnicities, we come from different tribes, we even have different religions, but we're all under this one umbrella as Nigerian citizens, all equal under the law. We had a terrible civil war 50 years ago that killed more than 1 million people, and your movement wants to drag us back into that mess again. How do you respond to them?
Well, it is very unfortunate. People who are saying all these things are either selfish or that they don't know what they are saying. As a matter of fact, indigenous populations are lumped together. They are forced to live in that contraption called Nigeria. There is no agreement for them to come together to become Nigerians. Nigerian citizenship was forced on them. Nigeria is a concussion, a contraption by the British. It is a Rugadian creation. It is an evil empire where people from diverse cultures, people who don't have any value, common value system, no common religion, no social, no common cultural values are brought together to live. And what you are seeing today is the consequences of that forced union. In the northern part of that contraption called Nigeria, you have the Islamic religion. In the southern part, you have Christianity, you have traditional religion. And then these people from the northern part think that, and they have always professed it, that Nigeria is their forefathers' estate. They are very violent. They are only good in unleashing terrorism against other indigenous populations who are living there. They have nothing to produce, they have nothing to bring to the table, they are unproductive. And just like the colonial masters we say, the North and South are just like oil and water that can never mix. And so anybody telling you that he is a Nigerian must be lying to him or herself, because in the first place, before Nigeria was concocted, there were indigenous populations. Ask those people where they come from. If you are accosted a Nigerian now, anybody that claiming that to be a Nigerian, and ask him where he is or where she is coming from, he will definitely go back to his ethnic or cultural origin.
But what's the problem of? What's the problem with having?
Origin.
Certainly, what's the problem with having an ethnic background, an indigenous background, your own religion, which might be from where you came from, but also being a Nigerian citizen and agreeing to be a part of the political system of Nigeria? Why do the two have to contradict each other? Why does everybody with a different ethnic identity need their own country?
It is symptomatic for evidence of the fact that Nigeria is not working. It is an eloquent testimony of the fact that people who are lumped together in that contraption called Nigeria are not supposed to be together. In United Kingdom, here where we are, you have people from Wales, you have Northern Ireland, you have the Scottish people, but they are all British people. They don't go towards digging up where they come from and all that. But in Nigeria, that is a different thing altogether. Our cultures are hostile to one another. Our religions are hostile to one another. We don't have common value systems.
Are your religions
and so
only...
everything is imploding.
Okay.
Again, ask yourself why we are always talking about unity.
Okay, hold on.
Why are we forcing ourselves to unite?
You say our religions are hostile to one another, which leads me to ask you about what Nnamdi Kanu told the BBC. And this, I think, is a really important line here. When I first read it, it jumped out at me, and I thought maybe he was misquoted, but it seems as if he wasn't. He said, should any other part of Nigeria wish to join Biafra, they are welcome to do so, as long as they are Judeo-Christian, the value system that underpins Biafra. That sounds like an exclusionary, supremacist mentality, doesn't it, Uche?
It is not.
Tell me why.
Northern Hausa Fulani, I'm telling you, the Northern Hausa Fulanis have started right from the outset to exclude others. Muhammad Buhari, for instance, has excluded people from Biafra land. He has been saying that we do not vote for him. He compared us to 5% to 95% and all that. You must have heard it. And so the issue of hate speech, the issue of hate conduct started from Ahmadu Bello.
So let me ask you, is there any law on the books of Nigeria?
Muhammad Buhari is carrying it on.
Is there any law on the books that you can name to me right now on this program that discriminates against the Igbo people?
There is no law that says that anybody should be discriminated. But what you are seeing is a situation where the Northern Hausa Fulanis are discriminating against everybody that are not from that ethnic origin. And it is manifesting in every aspect of life.
So,
for instance,
when Goodluck Jonathan was president,
of Nigeria,
when Goodluck Jonathan was president, what was that then? He's not a Northern Fulani.
No, he's not a Northern Fulani, because his emergence as president was a child of circumstance.
Okay, Uche Mifo.
Before he became president, it was very contentious.
Okay, it's been good to talk to you.
It was an act of God.
And I'm glad we've covered the story, because we spoke to the Nigerian government and now we've spoken to you, and I hope you'll come back on the program. Hopefully we can get the two of you together in a debate. That would be fantastic to host. Uche Mifo, I thank you for joining us here on the Newsmakers. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, China's Communist Congress. Will there be a purge in the Politburo? And how will a reshuffle reshape China? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.